God of War Ragnarok Review. Hello beautiful people. Today, we will talk about God of War Ragnarok game review. Before moving further, you can also watch our God of War previous game review by clicking the I button. Santa Monica Studio entertained the idea of telling the new chapter of Kratos' story throughout 3 games, making a trilogy similar to his first adventures. It is essential to bring this up because it gives the impression that God of War Ragnarok could have been divided in half and sold as 2 different video games. It is much bigger than 2018 feat as God of War in every way, and the sheer size of this project makes us think that other developers and publishers may have pushed for that trilogy. But no, Santa Monica Studio has made a game that makes the one that came before look like it was just the beginning. Ragnarok has so much going on that by the end, it's hard not to feel exhausted, but in a good way. It's a game that never stops coming up with new ideas, and we can only imagine how much work went into making such a huge game. That doesn't mean Ragnarok is a 200-hour monster, but most players will need about 50 hours to see everything in its impressively detailed world. We think about 30 hours will be spent on the main story. Again, though, the game's scope is almost mind-blowing. It's a title that keeps improving. When you think you're getting close to the end, it takes you somewhere completely different, and your sense of wonder never disappears. But, on the other hand, this sequel did have a solid foundation to build on. It's very similar to Kratos' first trip to Norse lands in terms of how it's put together. You'll again travel between different realms, all 9 of them, to be precise, going through linear and more open areas with a good mix of fights and puzzles. There are also side quests and lots of secrets in some areas. By the way, we are gathering gamers and gaming lovers like you in our YouTube channel RAYAROZEN, so it would be nice if you join our gaming community by subscribing our YouTube channel. At first glance, you might think Ragnarok is another God of War game. We thought the same thing in the first few hours of the game, but it won't be long before your hopes are dashed. Sony has only shown a small part of what Ragnarok has to offer, which is crazy looking back, so we recommend going into this as blindly as possible. Once the game comes out, there will be spoilers everywhere on the internet because there are so many surprises in store. In this review, we won't reveal any plot details regarding spoilers, but we will state that the main tale is an action-packed roller coaster. After everything in God of War 2018, Kratos and his now teenage son Atreus are in a bit of a rut. Midgard, where they live, is stuck in a never-ending winter, and Kratos, who can't decide what to do, have Atreus do nothing but prepare for the inevitable shitstorm that will hit them soon. It starts with a tense scene that soon explodes into action. From there, the plot keeps getting more and more complicated. Even though there are a lot of quieter moments, the pace is usually significant. It is mainly because the game has a much more involved cast of secondary characters. It is no longer just the story of Kratos, Atreus, and Mimir. As the plot continues, the father-son duo puts together a strange group of allies. As we've come to expect from a single-player Sony game, the story is very high quality. Ragnarok keeps the first game's single-shot style of directing and even takes it to dizzying new heights, and the talented motion capture and voice actors do a great job with the game. Even though this is a fantasy story, many of the main characters' interactions feel natural. Ragnarok has some great cinematic moments, but to say it's like a movie would be a terrible way to describe the game's top-notch gameplay. As we said before, everything is pretty much the same as it was before. Instead of starting over, the developer has spread things out in all different directions. Kratos gets a lot of new things to play with, both in and out of battle, which adds depth everywhere. But even if you didn't play the first game, this one does a great job of introducing new parts and pieces at a steady, manageable pace, which is great if you didn't play the first one. Even with Kratos' new options, the learning curve for combat is still satisfying. Fights are still satisfyingly brutal, and many new kill animations and attacks give an already robust system even more weight. As in 2018, the camera is close to Kratos' right shoulder. It makes essential to keep an eye on your enemies and ensure you aren't surrounded. Even though combat hasn't changed much at its core, the fact that there are more types of enemies makes Ragnarok feel like a big step forward. Even though a lot of the new creatures are recycled from the last game, it's clear that a lot of work went into making sure that you don't just fight a slightly different group of old dragons every 5 minutes. Then there are the battles with the bosses. People often said there weren't enough bosses that made them gasp in the last game. Santa Monica Studio has done a great job with the big bad guys this time. There are more unique bosses in the first 10 hours of Ragnarok than in God of War 2018, and every single one of them is a highlight. A colossal improvement. The second point of view is that you can't say enough about how many amazing things happen in this game. From the beginning to the end, God of War Ragnarok is full of action. Every part of the main story is a treat, with many significant parts at every stage. I'm not just talking about the big, jaw-dropping battles or the big story reveals, though there are many in the game. I'm also talking about the quieter parts. Kratos and Atreus change as characters, and their friends and enemies grow and get better. I won't give anything away, but the conversations are some of my favorite parts of the game. The game has fun, meaty combat and a lot of space to explore, but the cinematics, writing, and acting stand out to me. It's a beautifully made game that kept me glued to the screen for hours. Even though it builds on what was done in the last game, that shouldn't make you less excited for Ragnarok. Yes, it plays pretty much the same, but this sequel is so much bigger and has a more extensive scope that worries about God of War 1. 5 inches will go away quickly. On the topic of improvements, the gear and leveling system from the first game is better than before, but we're still not sure it adds anything of real value to the experience. To sum up, this new God of War saga quickly uses weapons and armor that can be upgraded with materials. Kratos' weapons and armor ranks add up to his overall power level. You can fight more brutal enemies with less trouble if you have a higher level. The gear system is primarily a way to limit access to content that isn't required. When you gain levels, you can go back to realms you've already been to and win fights that were too hard for you. It makes sense in design, but it's weird to see Kratos struggle against an average undead warrior just because it's a higher level and the health bar is a different color. Even if leveled equipment adds a sense of progression, it doesn't quite gel. We were glad we never felt like we couldn't move the main story forward because Kratos' loincloth wasn't good enough. By the end of the game, we had more than enough resources to outfit Kratos several times with high-level gear, and even if you don't do any of the optional content, you're still given enough gear to finish the campaign. You'll have a little more trouble, but that's how things go. So, that was a pretty minor complaint. Here's yet another. Ragnarok doesn't look as good as we had hoped. Don't get us wrong, this is a beautiful game sometimes, but we think that has more to do with how well the game looks than how well it plays. In other words, this is a cross-generational release because it isn't a significant improvement over the 2018 version. But 60 frames per second on PS5 is perfect. We prefer the game's performance mode because the action is too good to settle for anything less, but if you're willing to take a hit, there's also a 30 FPS option at an apparent 4K resolution. The DualSense support is also something that should be talked about. Ragnarok feels excellent on Sony's newest pad, which gives you all kinds of haptic feedback based on what you do. It makes fights even more intense and helps show how heavy Kratos is when he moves through the world. Cutscenes can be made more enjoyable with a cheeky rumble now and then. The game God of War Ragnarok is amazing. This one stands out even among the great games that PlayStation Studios usually makes. It's a masterfully made game that almost always exceeds expectations. God of War 2018 feels like a prologue compared to Ragnarok, which is probably the best thing we can say about a sequel. So, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you do like our video, make sure to like, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.